I'm Shinobu Kitayama. I'm a psychologist. I study culture as a psychologist, and I'm from Japan. So for those reasons, I've been very, very interested in psychology of Japanese people and also Japanese culture. And well, Japanese used to be doing very well, especially during the bubble economy. But once that economy collapsed, there seemed to be lots of problems. And in fact, people are increasingly killing themselves. So suicide rate is still trailing suicide rate of Russia and some other ex-communist countries today. But really, suicide rate in Japan is really high. And it's just one indication of some health issues, mental health issues that society appears to be facing, increasingly more in the recent years. And, well, it's easy enough to blame our politicians, their politicians, all series of prime ministers who never do any good job in the recent decade. But that's only simply, blaming somebody who is not supposed to be doing any good job in this domain. And we need to find out more disciplined approach to this very big problem. And when I look around and ask myself who could be a very good person who can discuss this with intelligence, with good background, with enough knowledge, and so on, and just occurred to me that she is the very best person. Chikako Ozawa de Silva is a Japanese by origin. She went to Oxford for undergraduate training. Before that, she spent some years in Jochi University, Sophia University in Tokyo, and then she went to Oxford for undergraduate degree and also PhD, as I understand. And then she spent some years in Harvard as a research fellow. That period was followed by a period as a postdoc in University of Chicago, where I met, and we had wonderful conversations back then. And then she moved on to take a job in Emory, one of the very best departments in anthropology in the United States and also in the world. And now she is a associate professor in anthropology department at Emory. Throughout her career, she's been interested in many issues, but most of the issues she has worked on have something to do with mind and body, particularly mental health or mental illness aspects of it. In her earlier career, she is still pretty young. So in the early period in her early career, she studied Nikan therapy, which is very common in Japan. And I think she has wonderful articles and publications on this very topic. But in more recent years, she moved on to focus more on patients themselves who might cause harm on their own bodies, namely suicide. And that's the topic of her presentation today. So please help me welcome Chikako. Her presentation today is on suicide and the social self, youth, government, and popular culture responses to internet group suicide in Japan.
Thank you very much for such a wonderful introduction. I really need to thank Dr. Kitayama for inviting me for today's talk and share one of my recent findings on internet group suicide in Japan. As Dr. Kitayama introduced, earlier on I worked on Nikan psychotherapy, or some just call Nikan or Nikan method in Japan. And if you're interested in Japanese form of psychotherapeutic practice, if you just go to Amazon, you can find a book. So finally the paperback has come out. So it's a little bit less expensive than the hardcover. And recently I have been working on internet group suicide, especially among youth in Japan. So some people say, like, why moving away from therapy to suicide? That sounds very depressive. And my answer is that, yeah, maybe that may be how it appears to be. But at the same time, it's really Nikan therapy and suicide are part of the same picture to me. From the young age, for some reason, I was very interested in this issue that when people face difficulties, some people, seek help in religion. In Japan, there are so many new religions. So that's one kind of place people find. Other people seek help in friendship and family members. That's another solution. Some, of course, go for therapies, but many people seem to think about suicide as if that's a valid option to choose to deal with the tough and difficult situations. So that's kind of how I recently started exploring the issue of internet group suicide. So first of all, the thing is that when you talk about Japan, there are so many things, well, Japan is supposed to be famous for or known for, but Japan also has a reputation, right, of being being a suicidal nation. And have you ever thought about why that may be the case? No. Right? So there are many kind of arguments in terms of why that may be the case. Many things that must be due to the high suicide rate in Japan. But surprisingly, suicide rate in Japan hasn't been that high. If you look at the suicide rate up until 1998, it really has been around 18 to 19 per 100,000 per year, which is really close to the area of where Russia and France has been. But really, 1998 was like the turning point for Japan, because what happens was, as many of you might know, in 1998, suicide rate jumped so much high. It was actually 35% rise from the previous year. And what is very neglected by the government was the fact when you look into the adolescent population, the increase was actually 54% from the previous year. So you see even more rise of suicide among young Japanese. And now suicide rate in Japan is second to Russia among the G8 nations. As you see, it was 26 per 100,000 in 1998, and it was 24.2 in 2005. So Russia, I think, is still being the, having the highest suicide rate of 32 or 36. But really, Japan is now really living up to the reputation of being the suicidal nation, which is very ironic. Let me show you the chart that it might not make sense. S means Showa, and H means Heisei. So as you see, that's this point. This H10, that's like 1998. So that's when you see this sudden suicide rate going up. And it has been like hitting over 32,000 every year. And it just hasn't been coming back to the previous levels since 1998. So that is a very concerning factor. But then, what is like the official explanation for the rise of suicide? And clearly, they have their own, kind of to me, a little bit simplistic picture of how to go about it. I kind of see that as a three-tier process. First of all, they say there is this kind of long-term economic recession. I was back in Japan last December, and I spent 8 months doing field research on suicide in Japan. And every day, NHK, which is like equivalent of the Japanese BBC News, talking about more suicide, more kind of, unemployment as the big issue. So clearly this economic recession is leading to the rise of depression. And with the rise of depression, clearly there is a rise of suicide. And that is so true, definitely. among the so-called middle-aged people, especially middle-aged men in their 50s or even 40s, who are not really used to the idea of losing a job, because Japan has been known for having a lifetime employment up until recently. So when they lose job, they don't know what to do, as if like they don't know any other options. So it seems like they immediately think about suicide as an option to take. But as anthropologists, this seems to be a little bit too simplistic, but also there is this issue about what about the rise of suicide among young Japanese. When I talk about internet group suicide, there are so many teenagers who are 15 years old, 17 years old. They even post that it's not that something is wrong with my life. So they feel like they have pretty affluent economic background. So this economic recession might not be the best way to explain the rise of suicide among the young Japanese. And on top of that, and which is today's topic, is the rise of the new form of suicide, such as internet group suicide. So again, I find this kind of a three-tier model cannot quite explain what we are seeing in this rise of suicide among the young Japanese. So, but talking about internet group suicide, how many of you actually have heard about internet group suicide? Wow, many. Well, clearly, many of you probably are really familiar with the Japanese society and then contemporary news in Japan. Well, to make it briefly, typically people arrange to meet to commit suicide via internet suicide sites. Let me introduce the first widely reported case of an internet group suicide. So the story begins in February 2003 with a teenage girl who went to the police and reported that she found one man and two women dead in the apartment room. They were apparently lying down side by side like the Japanese character for river, which draws like this way. The girl noticed that there were numerous charcoal briquettes in the Shichirin stove oven, which is a portable clay cooking stove, and all the windows were sealed up with Scotch tape. The police, of course, asked her why stumble across such a case. The police learned that she didn't really know that man. He was not her friend. It later turned out that the man had set up this apartment room to commit suicide and had invited others to join him over the internet. The two other women and the girl who later found them had agreed to do so at the karaoke box in Shibuya, apparently. The teenage girl got scared and changed her mind at the last minute. And she didn't join them, but she was curious and visited the place later, and that was how she found 3 dead bodies. So clearly, as you can guess, since then, numerous internet group suicides have been continuously happening. What was fascinating was that the police office had to create this new category of internet group suicide as one type of suicide. So that's why actually data is only collected from 2003. Some people suspect maybe it started around 2000, and there is a case which was reported in 2002. But according to the police record, there are 34 people who died, through internet group suicide in 2003. There are 55 people in 2004, 91 people in 2005. In 2006, you see a bit of a drop of 56, but that's when the data kind of unfortunately ends. The thing is, it is clearly not the case which has been disappearing by any means, but it has been more or less on the rise. And not surprisingly, mass media went crazy over this news, and it was reported day and night all over on the TV news. This is one news article. Actually, I have to explain why there is a picture of the car. Some of you might know already. This first widely reported case took place in the apartment. They, as I said, sealed up the windows with Scotch tape. But car is another really popular site because it's so easy to seal up the window and create the space, and they can just burn the charcoal briquettes. Sometimes TV even reproduced how it was done. And of course, that was widely criticized. Just like why TV reports actually show so thoroughly how it could be done. Well, they say how it was done. So when people know how to do clearly, it's not too surprising that there may be this chain reaction. But when you see this, there is a couple of very peculiar aspects to this new form of suicide. First of all, people almost always follow the same exact method, which is a carbon monoxide poisoning caused by burning charcoal briquettes in Hichirin stoves, either in a car or in a room. And second of all, there are actually usually more than 3 people who die by internet group suicide. There are cases of 2 people dying from this method, but when you see all the different cases, oftentimes there are 3 or 4 or even 7 people. And one suicide survivor said that 2 people aren't really enough, because if there are only 2 of you, there is this kind of you and I kind of interaction. So she felt that would be too much of the individual responsibility, that she has to decide to go ahead and die. But if there are more than 3 of them, then there is much less sense of the individual commitment or responsibility. She said it's like just following the group decision, and it's so much easy to do so. And lastly, these people who choose internet group suicide are often seeking comfortable death or painless death. It is really clear when you visit suicide websites. They often talk about how to die without pain. Not only that they are obsessed with finding a way to have this, painless death, they're also very concerned about how they are seen after they are dead. Dr. Kitayama's work on hito no me o kini suru, or how you are seen by others, is clearly playing part in this case. People often don't want to look ugly even after they are dead. They care so much about how they appear. So apparently with this kind of carbon monoxide poisoning, your cheeks would be even rosy. So you look almost like pretty even after you're dead. So therefore they highly praise this method. And that may be why they always go for this carbon monoxide poisoning as a method. So since September 2003, I have been visiting numerous suicide websites trying to understand why certain people are attracted to internet group suicide and what kind of turmoil and suffering they might be experiencing. I have been closely monitoring the statements of suicidal individuals on over internet suicide sites as a means for gaining insight into the suffering and the motivations for seeking out communication with others. So talking about the typical suicide sites or jisatsu site, there are 3 components to it. First of all, there is the presence of the moderator or kandinin, and sometimes this moderator plays a very crucial part of acting like a counselor. I have one site that I frequently visited because I was able to have really just amazing statements from visitors, but this moderator would really have the sympathetic comments, like, I understand your pain, but we can try to, help each other here. This is a site you can come in and just share your suffering. Other times, moderators don't play such active counselor-like part. It's like none of my business. So depending on the moderator, actually you see different kinds of jisatsu site or suicide website. And as you probably all know, there is bulletin board section. That's when you see a lot of postings from suicidal individuals. And there is chat rooms area or chatto. And there is one of the jisatsu site that I frequently visited, which is called Getto. Despite the image we might have when you think about suicide website, This site has a very light and floating feel rather than something dark and ominous. And that is something to be noted, really. Somehow, the suicide site is going for this kind of a roomy, and then there's a word ukiyo, but there's a kind of floating wordness among so many suicide websites. And I also studied popular culture's representation of suicide, internet suicides. Films and animations are often wonderful source to see social commentaries, as they are often cultural response to reality. Also, what I observed in these films, they are quite in accord to my findings in suicide websites. Jisatsu Circle or Suicide Club was one. Tokyo Sonata is again an interesting film, even though it doesn't talk about internet group suicide. It really talks about the kind of social pathology that the contemporary Japanese are facing. I also conducted interviews with 30 college students in Japan, asking their subjective sense of identity and their opinions about internet group suicide. I naturally stumbled across 2 people who actually attempted suicide when they were young, so it was an amazing actual experience. I also interviewed people at the NIMH in Japan, policy making, Inochi no Denwa or hotline in Japan. And now let me actually narrate several distinctive suffering these suicide website visitors frequently express. During my study, I was struck by certain recurring themes, comments, and expressions. One of the most frequently expressed concerns on suicide site is an absence of meaning. Some posts reflect the general existential concerns, such as, why was I born? Who am I anyway? Where am I going to go? I think there is no meaning to live, as I don't even know that. End of quote. Others cite specific incidents that led to a sense of life having no meaning. Quote, I turned 21 this year. There is something I have been thinking about for a long time. Why was I born in this world? When I was 10 years old, I was scolded badly by my parents. Since then, I started thinking that there is no meaning for me to live, and I've attempted suicide many times. End of quote. Several expressed that even though nothing is wrong with their life in terms of external conditions, such as family life, finance, and so on, they experience despair as a result of finding no meaning in life. So again, when you talk about the suicide among young Japanese, we have been often talking about ijime or bullying. But with bullying, there is oftentimes a very clear motivation. They're angry. They want to make social protest. There's a lot of revenge and anger in it. But what you see among these internet group suicide seekers are lack of them. You don't even feel the intense anger or revenge or even the social protest, which is very peculiar. And conjoined with this absence of meaning is a sense of intense loneliness. Almost all the posts I came across on suicide websites made a reference to how lonely the site visitors were. One individual wrote, quote, my dependency got worse as I started to participate in chat rooms. I feel anxious when I am alone. I cannot leave the computer even for a second. I feel anxious that I am not needed by anyone. Just being told that I am necessary would be enough. I would have peace of mind. I would do anything asked of me so as not to be disliked. I am lonely. I cannot live alone. I want to be strong. To be honest, I am becoming unsure of what I am living for. As I cannot believe in true love, I seek even just the words. I want to be loved and needed. End of quote. What is notable is how many of the posts do not give an explicit reason for this feeling of loneliness. The phrase nantonaku, meaning somehow or for some reason, occurs frequently, as in the following post. Quote, for some reason I am living. For some reason, I want to die. But I am afraid of pain, and it doesn't matter much about living. I don't know what I want to do. I just want to die. I wonder why. Loneliness is one category of existence, as philosophers such as Heidegger, Merleau-Ponty, Tillich, and Berber pointed its ontological and existential nature. But when we talk about loneliness, there are actually two kinds of loneliness. One is a beneficial quality that leads to a deeper self-understanding, which tends to be emphasized by numerous philosophers. But there is also a dysfunctional quality which causes pain. The social and health science tend to treat loneliness this way, or they tend to deal with this dimension of loneliness. So this positive dimension of loneliness is like solitude, or I call non-afflictive loneliness. As of a negative dimension of loneliness, I've come to call this state afflictive loneliness, to differentiate it from mere solitude. And I see it was a kind of existential suffering that is not reducible to a mental disease, such as depression, by borrowing the Buddhist taxonomies on mental states, which note that certain mental states are not afflictive when they disturb the peace of mind of the individual and are based in cognitive and affective distortions which are not in accord with reality. Medical anthropologists such as Arthur Kleinman have been warning the medicalization of human despair, and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl was also emphasizing the existential distress as opposed to the mental disease. So such afflictive loneliness is often associated with needing others to die with among suicide website visitors. Therefore, the following comments are very common. Quote, "Are you suicidal, and would you like to die with me? I don't have the guts to die alone. I'm asking for people who would like to die with me." End of quote. Another quote starts, "Is there anyone who wants to die but who cannot die alone? Please, let's die together." Another quote, "If it is all right with you, would you like to die with me?" Last quote starts, "I no longer wish to suffer, but I am too afraid to die alone. Is there anyone who wishes to die with me?" So in many cases, afflictive loneliness seems to combine in the wish to die with others. In other words, to escape the pain of loneliness and absence of meaning in this life, but at the same time to do so in a connection with another person or persons, because to die alone would be too painful. So what is then the public reaction to the internet group suicide? Well, traditionally, as we might know, Japanese culture is known to be very tolerant of suicide. Sometimes suicide is actually considered a sign of personal responsibility and maturity. Otherwise, suicide is often seen as the act of individual will in a conformist society. That's like the only freedom an individual has in Japan. Suicide or resolve, or kakugo no jisatsu, this term captures and embodies such a view perfectly, because there is a sense this is an act of the rational mind. There is no hint of indicating there may be a mental distress such as depression and so on. The recent suicide of the writer Eto Jun shows such a view is still prevalent, because most of the media reported this is such a heroic act. He followed his wife who died a year before his death, and they really romanticize the death of this writer. A psychiatrist, Takahashi Yoshitomo, whom I got to know very well in Tokyo, was one of the minority who was very critical of such a view. He said, it is very clear when you see his journals toward the end of his life that he was clearly suffering from depression. But again, this kind of romanticized view took dominant view. But anyway, such a characteristic, positive cultural tolerance does not really extend when it comes to the internet group suicide. And the public reaction to the internet group suicide has been overall negative and very critical. Oftentimes they use the term such as, it is very irresponsible, it is very callous, it is a copycat. That was very fascinating to me, that somehow Japanese society, which often give the moral positive value to the suicide, just didn't do that to the internet group suicide. But I think such public reaction really negates the reality of existential and mental pain that these suicidal individuals are experiencing. So in short, I found out a distinctive kind of mental and existential suffering, which involves, first of all, this absence of meaning. Second, there is afflictive loneliness or intensive loneliness, and needing others to die with. And there is a sense of disconnectedness. And lastly, there is a wish to die in comfort. So popular culture representations of internet group suicide resembled when I noticed in internet group suicide. Depiction of suicidal individuals in popular culture or social commentaries provide a valuable source for analyzing how the public views suicidal individuals in Japan. From my interviews and ethnography of internet suicide, such representations capture dimensions of internet group suicide that are missed in the official discourse on internet suicide, as they often capture human dimension and subjective experience of these people. We see these themes which are very similar to the visitors' comments on suicide website. Now let me introduce animation series called Paranoia Agent. This is an animated production created by the director Kon Satoshi. He produced film animations such as Perfect Blue, Millennium Actress, and Tokyo Godfather. So I think I've seen all of them and I enjoyed them. But this Paranoia Agent was aired from February to May 2004. In the opening, you'll see a number of scenes that set the overall tone of the show, which seems to be that Japanese society is obliviously unaware of the disastrous state it finds itself in. Individuals who represent a cross-section of Japanese society smile and laugh in various high disturbing settings. Meanwhile, the lyrics of the opening share the ironic tone of the black comedy. The lost children are a spectacular mushroom cloud in the sky. Quell your depression. Stretch your legs towards tomorrow. Don't worry about things like tidal waves. Well, this kind of spectacular mushroom cloud clearly hint to me the A-bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And if you can just follow the subtitle, which is a little bit tiny, but please pay attention. This episode I'm going to show is specifically on internet group suicide. You will see 3 individuals who get acquainted on the internet suicide website. And the episode begins when they first meet in person. You will see occasional flashbacks to the internet, initial conversations online. Also, I have to let you know that there is a kind of a mystery-solving element too. I didn't get it for the first time. I had to watch 2 or 3 times. But let me show.
しいですね。ネットの感じだと時間に遅れるような子じゃないんだけど。ま、変わったとしても無理はないか。まさかね。いくらなんでもまだ子供じゃないですか。カモメさんはもっとこうなんていうかそのカモメさんっておいくつでしたっけ？
でしょ？ゼブラゼブラゼブラゼブラ。冬バチ冬バチ冬バチ冬バチ。
あれ？最後の一条ですか。ごめんね。いただきます。カモメちゃん。悪いことをしちゃったかな。なに、カモメ君は死ぬにはまだまだ若すぎます。後で化けて出て謝りましょう。はーい。え？ゼブラちゃん。カモメはここだよ。ほら、私を置いていく。なんとも間の悪い。出直しますか。邪魔も入ったことだし。やだやだやだやだ。カモメも死ぬ。みんなと死ぬの。なに、心配には及ばんさ。 万が一の時のために事前の策は用意しておきました。いいですか、ゼブラ君。まず縦一列に並び私が飛び込む。その次にカモメ君をホーム側に押しながらゼブラ君がついてきてください。
電車にひかれちゃうとこうなるんだ。
飛び込みはちょっと美しくないかもですね。
Again, they're talking about how ugly it looks if you die this way.
参った参った。おぼては痛いよこれ。
デーブさん、何してんの？早くおいでよ。なかなか死ねないね。
こんなご時世です。死神も忙しくてわしらにまで手が回らんのさ。
So, anybody got the mystery part? So, for the rest of this episode, what you see is like they are really depressed and sad that, they keep trying to die with various different forms, but they keep fading until they realize that they have been dead all along. So when you saw them like inhaling this monoxidizing poisoning, they actually died there. But for a long time, they're not aware that they have been dead. So there's the kind of irony. If you pay attention, actually, they lose a shadow from the time, That's why the building was demolished and all of strange things was able to happen. But again, you see, right, this kind of, how, I don't know, especially this little girl, Kamome, really, really wants to stick around. She doesn't want to be alone. It's like to die with these two grown-up is like something she's really looking forward to. So the three characters, Zebra and Fuyubachi with chest pain and a young girl, Kamome, are depicted as you saw very happy when they actually, they realize they are in fact dead. And none of the characters is shown as mentally disturbed, but they are ordinary people, and their attempts at group suicide are depicted as normal activities. When one of them is a young girl, when there was a UK version, actually they deleted the character Kamome because they felt that was so wrong. But it is again interesting why that wasn't the case in Japan. But that's a whole different topic from today's discussion. So their ordinariness is colored by the fact that they seem to have nothing to live for, hence they see this as a blissful release. But a release into what is a question. At the end of the episode, they are happily frolicking knowing they are dead now. It's really ironic because nothing has changed in their condition at all, except that they now seem to feel having died, they are free. But like free from what? Free from body? Free from social roles and expectations? Free from responsibilities? it is left open interpretation to the audience. What you see is this kind of ordinariness, in which I mean there's a lack of dramatic element and lack of the clear reason for committing suicide. There is also this sense of loneliness you see a lot in Kamome if you see the rest of the episode too, and the strong need to die with others, and dying in comfort appears very strongly. So this leads to me the question of sharing a word and relational selfhood. The idea that Japanese psychology is characterized by a sociocentric or interdependent construct of selfhood, and that Western psychology is characterized by an individualistic construct of selfhood has been a topic of investigation and debate for some time now in both cultural psychology and in anthropology. Selfhood is an extremely difficult topic to study and is made all the more confusing by the fact that the term self can be used to refer to numerous distinct and different things. It's like an umbrella term to some extent. An important question, I think, is how we recognize both the commonalities and differences in selfhood between the West and Japan in a way that honors both universal processes and cultural distinctiveness. My view, building off from the work of Cooley, Mead, Philip Rocha, and Kitayama, and others, is that there are universal processes of selfhood that arise developmentally through which the self emerges in dependence on and in relationship to others. From the beginning, the sense of self co-emerges with and through the relationality to others. Therefore, there is a sense of self on the one hand, and its relationships with others on the other hand. However, it varies culturally as to which aspect of this dual process is emphasized. As Marx and Kitayama argued in their influential 1991 article, I also hold the view that Western cultures tend to emphasize independence and autonomy and the self as an interior, separate entity, whereas Japanese culture emphasizes a relational aspect of the self with others and de-emphasizes the self as an independent, individual, and unseen interiority. Exteriority and interiority form one dimension by which one can see this cultural difference. Judging from my ethnographic interviews and judging from the work of Shimizu Hidetada and Kitayama, Japanese place more emphasis on the self that is seen, by which I mean the self that is the object of perception by others, whereas North Americans tend to place more emphasis on the self that is not seen, by which I mean the self as an interior dimension that is not directly visible to others. The intention is not to set up another dichotomy that contrasts Japanese versus American selves. Clearly, individuals in both societies are concerned with both of these two dimensions of selfhood, but the way they function and the emphasis placed on each in self-understanding seems to reveal significant differences. In a recent article, the developmental psychologist Philip Rocha outlines the features of what he calls the basic affiliative need. This is the need for mutual recognition and acknowledgement, and it is basic because, in his words, we essentially live through the eyes of others. Living through the eyes of others clearly implies a strong and intimate connection between self and other. Thus, it is no surprise that Rocha considers that social cognition is inseparable from self-cognition. Social knowledge and self-knowledge are two sides of the same coin. As Rocha notes, knowledge about the self comes largely from interaction with others, and the self is constituted through relationships with others. This kind of development of self-knowledge is no doubt universal, but the dimension of the self that exists in relationship with others and that exists as the self that is seen by others is made more prominent through the current cultural practices of Japanese society. The mere fact that scholars from Heidegger and George Herbert Mead to contemporary scholars such as Rocha have gone to such great lengths to show the importance of sociality in the development of the self indicates that this line of thinking is something that is not taken for granted in the Western thought. The background assumption against which such scholars are articulating their viewpoints is that the idea that the individual is a person who does not depend on others, that the self is that which exists separately from others. Correspondingly, it is not uncommon for North American ideology of selfhood to include ideas such as, "What you see is not me." In other words, a claim that there is a fundamental break in the chain of signification from the perception of my outer appearance to knowledge of my inner being. In contrast, the background assumption in Japanese thought is that the self is relational self that exists in dependence upon others and that is seen by others. Almost 30 college students I interviewed, most of them told me that they care how they are seen by others, and how others see them is a pretty objective evaluation of their self. Thus, Mee's observation that the individual mind can exist only in relation to other minds with shared meanings, and Rocha's insistence that within months of birth, the self is increasingly defined in relation to others, not on the basis of an interior subjective experience, have a particular resonance within Japanese culture. It is already innately understood that who I am is who I am to other people. I exist in relation as someone seen and experienced by others. The noble idea by way of contrast would be that I could exist independently. If we put together the developmental model that shows the self emerges from the beginning already with the dual nature of being both individual and interdependent, together with our understanding of cross-cultural differences, then we see a very full picture, because we can see how cultures are merely emphasizing different aspects of the dual nature of the self. The greater emphasis on the socially constructed nature of selfhood evident in Japan result in a correspondingly greater emphasis on the importance of intersubjectivity and what might be called sharing a world. This is a dynamic process of mutual interaction that is deeper than mere surface-level imitation or mirroring. It is participation in the collective dance or ritual that forms the foundation of sociality and society itself. Ironically, however, awareness of the relational nature of the self and the importance of sharing a world does not necessarily lead to the only positive effects. Rocha notes that the basic affiliative need and the other dependence of self-consciousness result in a fear of social rejection that he labels the mother of all the fears. This seems particularly prevalent in Japan, where proscription or prohibition of individual experience translates into the fear and felt intolerability of being left behind or left out, and where the great importance placed on maintaining shared experience takes priority over and downplays individual experience and autonomy. This dimension of selfhood and effects it has on interpersonal relations are important factors in understanding group suicide here. The intolerability of being left behind is something that is not only felt for oneself, but also projected onto others. This is seen in forced suicides, when the father commits suicide and kills the remaining family members, or when the mother commits suicide and kills her baby at the same time. Such acts are called shinju in Japanese. Culturally, such shinju is considered a form of suicide in Japan. The mother cannot conceive that the baby could live independently of her. The husband cannot conceive of his wife living independently of him, so they commit suicide and kill the other. The fact that society understands these deaths not as murder-suicide, but merely as suicide or collective suicides, is evidence of the acceptance of the inherently social and shared nature of experience, what we might call the intersubjectivity of experience. Such suicides are an example of intersubjective death or shared death. With this understanding of selfhood, we see that the need to share a world can have both positive and negative dimensions. On the one hand, it can fulfill the basic affiliative need and provide a source of comfort and support. On the other hand, it can represent social pressure to go along with others and to conform to the group norms and behaviors. The social pressure can become overpowering and leads to the wish to vanish from the overburdening gaze of others. In some cases, this can manifest as hikikomori, and in others as a phenomenon of internet group suicide. Now let me make a few concluding remarks. In a poem posted on the suicide website, an anonymous author writes, quote, "Someone please look at me and acknowledge me. Please acknowledge the fact that I am here." This need of others is a recurring theme in the expressions of suicidal individuals on the internet. Moreover, it has a dual dimension. Those who seek out others over the internet with whom to commit group suicide are not willing to commit suicide on their own. They need others. However, they also often express that they need to be needed by others. Thus, a key difference in the suicide act and the events leading up to it, such as the establishment of contact, the planning of the suicide, and the meeting carrying out of the plan. The line of the poem from the suicide website underscores Rocha's argument that a lack of recognition from others is a lack on the fundamental basis on what it means to be a human being and what it means to be a person, a self. As he writes, social comfort thus consists in the experience of being recognized as much as we recognize the other. Inversely, social discomfort is the experience of being transparent or invisible for others. The experience of not being acknowledged, hence socially disconnected. This perspective enables us to consider that the question of meaning in life is not itself primary when considered as an existential question, but rather the symptom of a decrease in the sense of affiliation and connectedness with others. It is this loss of affiliation which leads to a loss of meaning that itself becomes the cause for questioning of meaning in life. This is necessary must be the case if the meaning of the self lies in its relations with others. The dependent nature of the meaning of the self is not something that can be escaped, even in suicide. One student even stated that being needed by others is the meaning in life, isn't it? As a matter of fact statement. Internet suicide does not appear on the surface to be the result of a clear intention or motivation, which is partially why it is viewed critically as callous. However, a motivation is only clear if it is easily understood by other people. There may be motivations that are more or less communicable within the cultural context. Furthermore, assigning motivation to suicides can at times be nothing more than ascribing of culturally accepted meanings and representation to acts that are in reality much more ambiguous and multifaceted, and even potentially beyond the ability of the suicidal individual themselves to fully describe. The case of internet group suicide indicates that rather than coming from the excessive individualism as Durkheim suggested, some forms of suicide may be due to a basic affiliative need being insufficiently met. This difference is an important one because framing of the self and society that is inherent to Durkheim's explanation, which conceived the possibility of an individual and society diet, does not capture the particular cultural self-concept that is of certain importance among Japanese, namely the self that is seen. The loss of relationships with others is therefore not an excessive individualization, but actually a loss of self and loss of the very meaning of self. Thank you very much for listening.